Today, we're going to look at the positive side of things that we can say to each other and what the Bible has to say about our speaking into other people's lives. So, I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys and see if there's any example that you can think of where positive words that were spoken really made a difference in someone's life.
The phrase that I took is actually it came from you. You know, from a multitude times that we had spoke, and but one really stuck with me, and I kind of use it, kind of steal it from you. And it's the one that says it's better to be loving than right. Sometimes we're not being loving to our brothers and sisters because in our head we think we are 100% right about a situation, but there's always two sides of the story. That phrase gave me the freedom to negotiate with myself and to give the other person the benefit of the doubt and just to be more loving towards them than to be right.
Well, thank you. Well, that's encouraging to hear because a lot of times I think we say things to people, and unless they come back to us like you just did, we never realize the impact that something that we've said may have had on the way that they handle other things in their life. So I appreciate your sharing that with me. It's actually kind of surprising to me as I started to reflect on this. I thought it was going to be much easier and that I'd be able to rattle off a dozen examples off the top of my head because I know that there probably have been dozens of times where this has been true. But I think many times we don't realize the impact that our words may have. And this cuts both ways. I guess we'll start with what Solomon had to say on it, where he says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." And we really do have the capacity to tear down or to build up with our words. And that is such a tremendous power that's given to us. And it might not be visibly evident, the consequences of what you say. But oftentimes, what is said can have a greater power to impact someone's life than things that may be physically obvious. I remember a time where I went to speak at a women's shelter, and one of the women there was saying, and everybody else agreed with her, that the words that were spoken to her in that particularly harmful relationship were more painful than the broken bones. And that was just such a powerful statement that, physical, serious harm was not as bad as the impact that the words were to tearing her down in her spirit. And we really do have such a capacity, and this is probably nowhere more true than in our own families. I think that as parents, sometimes we have the capacity to be able to really say things that will stick with our children long after we've forgotten them, or in our own lives, things that our parents have said to us may stick with us for a lifetime. And so it really is so important to weigh the consequence of what you might say, especially words that are said in anger or in haste, really can have a disproportionate impact. You might not have thought that much about it before saying it, but it could last a lifetime in that other person's spirit. And then Solomon says in this is verse 16:24, one of my favorite verses. For some reason, this just really stuck with me. Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. And I really think there's truth in that pleasant words and encouragement really can heal someone on the inside and actually translate itself into physical health. And what I did was I went through the book of Acts. I could have come up with more, but I think these will give you the flavor of it. Judas and Silas, who themselves were prophets, said much to encourage and strengthen the believers. And that was Acts 15. Acts 16. After Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them. And next is Acts 18. When Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, the brothers and sisters encouraged him. And then Acts 20, he traveled through that area speaking many words of encouragement to the people. See, I think you see the picture here of um, Christian sharing is meant to be filled with encouragement. Now, it doesn't go into a great detail about what encouragement might have looked like, but that's actually something that I could ask you now. Give me an idea of what form encouragement might take. Can you think of a way in which people can encourage one another?
It's just helping somebody with a project or something that they're struggling with. That's an encouragement.
So you can encourage them by coming alongside them.
Yes.
Right. So it doesn't always have to be purely verbal. It can be through acts of service, of helping them with whatever it is they're involved with. That's very good. That's actually something that I wanted to bring out. So thank you. Can someone think of another example? Because I think there are lots here of things that you might say to encourage someone, just generically. What does encouragement look like in real life?
Maybe an example is I know I've been encouraged when I was maybe going through something and somebody has come along and said, well, I've gone through the same thing you have. So I want you to know and be encouraged that it's going to be okay, or how it came out with me. So don't fret it. Don't think you're the only one that's been through a problem. I hate to be a negative, but again, if somebody's going through a problem, you share your story. That's an encouragement that they know that they're not alone.
Absolutely. So basically, letting them know they're not the only person who's gone through this. This reminds me of actually something that I watched earlier this week. I like professional football, and my team is the Giants. And I happened to watch a show which I'd never seen before. There was a YouTube episode called Second Wind. And I guess these people have athletes, professional athletes on their show who have gone through times where they've fallen in their professional lives, where they've had adversity, where they've failed. And then they are able to pick themselves up and go on to become great players again, or perhaps maybe for the first time. And this was a particular a tight end for the Giants, who really had a very disappointing career with them over the past couple of seasons. And then he was traded to another team, and he's really gotten a second wind. And so he really had to be built up. And this whole show is about telling stories of people who've had disappointing chapters in their lives, but then they were able to overcome that adversity and still go on to something that was really memorable or admirable. And I think that's just a great example of a type of encouragement. So in Ben's example, it would be if, let's say he's going through something and somebody says, yeah, I've had to deal with that. And, here's how I was able to get through it, or I know you'll be able to do it. And so they're identifying with you in your humanity, because all of us are incomplete in and of ourselves. We all need some additional encouragement. And really, that's probably something that I should have started with is, what is encouragement? Well, if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll see that encouragement literally means to inspire or to fill up with courage. And as you can see from the book of Acts, there's a lot of encouragement that's going on everywhere that the gospel's being spread. And I know that at various points in my life, when I have gotten discouraged, it has surprised me, because I've said to myself, why is it that you get discouraged so easily? Why doesn't it take more to discourage you? And I've come up with something that I think is a really good word picture that I'd like to share with you. People are like rafts. And let me explain what I mean. When I first came down to Florida, I used to enjoy going to the beach for a few days, and I would go into the ocean. I would take a raft with me. And of course, I'd have to blow it up first, and then I'd go out there, and I'd ride the raft in on the waves, and it would be a fun experience, something that I enjoyed. Well, after a day spent at least part in the surf, I'd come in, I'd be tired, and eventually I'd go to sleep, and then I'd get up the next day and I'd be ready to start again. But my raft wasn't ready to go. Inevitably, it would be deflated because the combination of the pounding that it took in the surf and perhaps just a little bit of the passage of time, well, overnight, it would have lost some of its air and it wouldn't really be good to ride the next day until I took the time to re-inflate it. Well, that's kind of how I think we are, that we go through life and life pummels us like that surf does. It beats us up and we get deflated. And we need to be encouraged. We need to be filled up again. And there are various ways in which you can get filled up. And Margie gave us one, is maybe another person comes alongside you and shares your load. Or what Ben was saying, it might be someone that shares a story of, I've felt that way. I understand what you're feeling. I've been there. Or it might be just someone who is speaking into your life, who has something that's going to be edifying to share with you or encouraging to hear. And you really never know where the other person is when you're sharing with them. And I reflected over the course of this past week over what story I might share with you. And I think certainly the biggest one I can recall was when I first started the process of getting my home ready to be constructed. I met with a surveyor out at the house. My first time meeting him, and we just walked the property, and I just noticed he seemed sad. And so I spent a little bit of time with him after our business was concluded, and I didn't think anything else about it until years later. And we talked about this, you don't always know the impact your words have. Years later, I get a letter from him, and he tells me that he had already planned to commit suicide that night. I was going to be the last person he was ever going to talk to. And I had no idea this was the case. I just was responding to a sense that he seemed sad. He seemed like he needed, somebody to kind of take an interest and show that they just wanted to talk to him. And so I don't think I said anything particularly remarkable. But the very fact that I showed an interest in him and cared about him enough to take a half an hour out of my day, it obviously had such an impact that he went back and obviously he didn't kill himself that night. And he really started thinking about, why would this man who's a complete stranger care about me enough to take an interest? And that started him on the path to finding God. And so I think each one of us, again, this is a great illustration of the power that we have in our words to really affect people's lives far more profoundly than we might realize at the time. Well, I've got a few other scriptures here. In Ephesians, we see an interesting contrast that the Bible tells us. Because Solomon talked about the power that's in the tongue of life and death. We're going to see that contrast here. He says, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moments, that will give grace to those who hear. In other words, don't speak words that are going to be unworthy of you as a Christian. And it could be profanity, or it could be just something that is, could be gossip, it could be derogatory speech, it could be many different types of speech that are not worthy of who you are. And I'm reminded of James chapter 3, where James talks about a fountain cannot issue forth both sweet water and bitter. need to be the fountain that produces the good water. You can't go back and forth because ultimately what you say is going to impact you. And that reminds me of a teaching of Jesus. This is in Luke chapter 6, where Jesus says, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. And I think there's such wisdom in that. The people bring up out of their nature. You've probably met people who say bad things a lot, and they're bringing up stuff out of what's in them. And I think it cuts both ways. That if you make the conscious choice to start speaking good, that will reverse the process of the bad that originally caused the unwholesome things to come out of you. So in other words, all of us have seasons of life where we go off course and we come back. That's completely normal. But what Luke is saying here is that ultimately you are going to bring forth out of what's stored deep inside of you, and you really want to have good words because your words reflect who you are. I want to start at the very beginning of the book of Joshua, and Joshua is the leader that was chosen to succeed Moses and lead the Jewish people into the promised land. And if you think about it, it's an amazing amount of responsibility that's put on his shoulders. And you might not immediately realize it. You might think, well, Abraham, he's the father of the nation. Now, there's a truly important man. But when Abraham started, it was a nation of one. By the time it got to Joshua, he was responsible for leading a couple of million Jewish people into a land where they were completely unprepared in the natural to be able to deal with what they're going to face there. And so God says to Joshua, not once, not twice, but if you look at the end of Deuteronomy, the last book that talks about Moses, and then just the first chapter of Joshua, you will find 7 different times that God in the Bible encourages Joshua, the man. And you think about that, wow, he had to be encouraged 7 different times. It's because he had this awesome responsibility that was placed on his shoulders. But that's just an indication of how much we all need encouragement. And so I guess my encouragement to you today is, if you find yourself needing encouragement, don't be surprised by that. That's the design of the human being. We're like rafts. We leak out our emotional strength. We need to be encouraged. Sometimes it's from words of others. Sometimes it can be from reading the Bible. You might find solace in the Bible or things that inspire or encourage you. Obviously, the circumstances will be different, but all of us have things that we can keep as keepsakes in our memories. Or it might be, maybe you got a letter that encouraged you. Save that letter. Put it in a folder where you can take it out and you can read it again, and it can re-encourage you. So bring courage back into you again at a time when you need it, because all of us will go through these times where we need to be inflated because life has deflated us. So those were the scriptural lessons that I could find when it came to the subject of encouragement and discouragement. And I just wanted to hear if anyone has any stories or any thoughts they'd like to share about encouragement.
I was thinking of the means of grace, the fellowship, the gathering of the saints, worship, prayer, Bible study. Those are all things that encourage me because it takes the focus off of self and puts it on God. So the body of believers really is responsible for encouraging one another. And that's one of the reasons why I think we should all get together on the Lord's Day and worship.
And that's very helpful. Basically, that's what we see, is that people can help lift us up. And just being in the presence of other people who are of similar mind, similar focus, I think is an encouragement to us. Because if all you do is stay home and watch the news all day, it's not going to take very long before you're going to get discouraged.
Yeah. Amen.
Good. Who else has a thought on this?
Sometimes just being kind to one another is enough to change someone's day. Just a simple smile, to smile to a stranger, a complete stranger, just saying, as you enter a room with a group of people, just saying good morning. Just if you're in the elevator, just look at the person on the eye and say, "How you doing? How are you?" Just little things that we can do, not just with our family members or our friends, just to any strangers, because we're all brothers and sisters in God. And I think it just takes one little gesture to change someone's life. Someone, they might be having a terrible morning, and you drive it, you just wait, and you go first. That could be a change in this person's morning or day. It can change the like you mentioned before. Someone can be thinking committing something terrible like a suicide, but just this little gesture of humanity to one another, it could really impact the life of someone else. So I think just the little things in life, that's the one that sometimes we are missing, and we need to improve more on that.
It costs us literally nothing to be able to brighten someone's day. Like you said, just a smile, just a kind word, taking that moment to show humanity, to show kindness to another person, it really can have an outsized impact on them. It might be 10 seconds from you, but it might change the course of their whole day. I remember there's a story, it's called, I think, For Want of a Nail. It shows the power of consequence. And it says, for want of a nail, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. An entire kingdom ends up falling. And it's all because of this one nail that was missing. And that is the pinprick that gets the whole chain of motion started. Well, I think that's possible positively too. In other words, that because you are kind to someone, maybe they will be kind to someone. And then it basically will ripple through in ways you could never possibly foresee. And so don't ever underestimate the power of encouragement, because everyone needs it. Now, not everybody needs it in the same way, because God made us all different in terms of our personality. Some people are more external and where they need to get their encouragement from, and other people are more internal. And there's not a right or a wrong here. God just makes different people with different personalities. But if you are a person who needs external encouragement, then be sure to surround yourself with at least a few people who are going to be speaking good things into your life, because you're going to need that. If you're more of an introverted person, someone who is more of an internal focus, then you might not need encouragement in the same way, but I guarantee you still need encouragement. It just might not be that same form of encouragement as someone else, because all human beings need encouragement.